Allah, Yahweh, Bashem, Yahushua, Bashem, the Kaf, Sadash, Yamada to the apostles, and others a great millstone, and peace, taste of icon of his work, and truth, sincerity, and the four corners of the earth. All right. Just doing this lesson, okay, in transit. All right, going into this Iran and US war situation. All right. And from what I'm hearing, on a lot of different channels, all right, a lot of these different truther channels, all right, and conspiracy channels. All right. They're saying that there is a impending, all right, FF, you know, getting ready to be done, in Babylon, man. Okay. Which this is no surprise, to the men of the Lord, seeing as Esau already did this, with the 911 fiasco, man. Because the people aren't in favor of this war. All right, the American people are not in favor of this. Okay, the American people, the Babylonians, are worried about gas prices. All right, they're worried about their bills. Okay, they worried about getting laid off. All right, they worried about they damn property taxes. Okay, they worried about they children. All right, being a bunch of goddamn fairies and moles. They ain't worried about Iran, man. You know, so Esau has to get them worried about Iran. Okay, has to use the biggest tool that Esau, this devil, has, which is fear. All right, the same thing he used, all right, during the Crown Royale, man. All right, to get all you suckers inoculated with the snake venom. Okay, he's gonna use that again, man. He's gonna put that fear on your ass. Okay, so you say, you know what? Let's send our men to war. Fuck it. You know, hey, they rose up on us. They laid down 1,000 Americans. They did this and that. They did an attack. They don't even got to be that big of an attack. As long as it's recorded, all right, and it's gruesome, okay, and they can tie it in, all right, to Iran's doing. The people are gonna go for it. All right, these people are bugged out, man. Okay, which is still gonna be some resistors. All right, but Esau is prepared for that too. He's prepared for you to resist. All right, he's prepared for you to be anti-war. If you anti-war, all right, Esau is gonna demonize your ass, and make you out to be public enemy number one. How dare you go against America? Okay, and then they fight for freedom. Okay, freedom and liberty. All right, of the Iranian people, man. How dare you? They over there torturing. The small hats, man. They gonna shame your ass. So in all these major cities, all right, all these fucking sporting events and shit, you know, that danger is lurking. All right, because we know Esau's MO, man, because that shit ain't working, man. The typical warmongering whine, all right, it's not working anymore. All right, especially with these people suffering and they already being disgruntled. Okay, they're not just gonna send their sons and daughter off to die for you. Okay, they need a incentive. Okay, and Esau is gonna give you niggas, all right, that incentive. All right, and he gonna use outright force. All right, that's why he put in the draft law. All right, the newer draft law. Okay, that you ain't gotta go sign up. You ain't gotta go apply for your driver's license as a male. Okay, you don't gotta do it when you're registered to vote. Nah, it's gonna be off rip. Soon as you turn 18, all right, they can round your ass up to get drafted. Okay, and a lot of people say they're gonna resist. All right, but when they get that pressure on them, just like during the Crown Royale, all right, they're gonna go along and join Esau's military, man. Okay, plus Esau gonna have that package for him. Look, we got this and this. You get that Hellcat. You want a Hellcat? You know, sign on to this 4-year contract. You get 25K now. All right, then you get 25 later. That's enough for your Hellcat, right? You know, a dumbass nigga's gonna do it. Okay, then your ass gonna eat a missile. All right, in the Middle East, man. You know, and the fact that these people don't know the play by now just shows that these people are in the goddamn dead zone, man. You know, spiritually dead, mentally dead, you know, and even physically dead. That's why they gotta try to whip you niggas into shape to go to their military, man. Which Esau really don't give a shit. You know, he just pretends like he cares, you know, to build this patriotism, but he really don't care. He'll send you fat slobs out there to die. He don't give a fuck. You know, he just need his sacrifice. You know, they just putting on a damn image. All right. Here it is. This is what the 8th month of this. Well, 6 months, I think. I believe it's 6 months. I believe the war started in February or March. I think it was February. Yeah, February, the end of February, you know? So it's been March, April, May, June, July, you know, going into August, you know. So it's been 6 months, you know, roughly. All right. And we really ain't even seen the chain reaction of the Strait of Hormuz closing. We just seen the price of oil and gas go up, you know, which is totally, you know, being manipulated, man. You know, totally manipulated. So that chain effect hasn't even happened yet. You know, we haven't even seen those high store prices. All right, due to all these shortages and shit. It ain't even hit yet. You know, so when that shit hit, you know, the people are gonna be in great mourning, man. You know, they really gonna be looking for a damn solution. Okay, and Esau is holding off a lot of this shit, man. He's holding off a lot of the famine. You know, he's holding off a lot of the inflation. You know, because he wants that shit to be in a big wop. You know, to have you people really completely down and out. All right, to really wipe the system. You know, to really create that great reset. Okay, and your nation is not your nation. This nation is totally all right on lock, stock, and barrel. All right, however that saying goes, by Amalek. All right, and it's not even close. Okay, it's not even close. You can't speak against them. All right, you can't vote against them. Okay, you can't take them out of office. You can't call them out of nothing. All right, you are all you Babylonians are a bunch of slaves. All right, to the small hats who openly call you, you know, a heathen and goyim. All right, but when Jake do it, all right, you get mad. All right, when the Negroes, Latinos, the Native Americans call you people heathens and Edomites, you know, you got a problem with it. But when the small hat do it, you know, he gets a pass. You know, but all that is about to be turned around and flipped on his head, man. Okay, the last is gonna be first. All right, and the first gonna be last. Esau, you the first right now. You know, your ass is living it up. You doing your thing. You know, and Jake is the last. Jake is at the bottom of the totem pole. You know, first fire, first hire. I mean, last hire, first fire. And you seeing that right now with the B Dub. They getting rid of your ass, Keisha. You know, but that's all I had. You know, for this quick transit lesson and shalom.